When my wife asked for a break, she didn't cry, she didn't argue, she didn't even try to make it sound like a big deal. She just sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, and said she needed space to think, like it was something normal, something couples do all the time, like it didn't come out of nowhere after 5 years of marriage that, at least from my side, had felt stable, predictable, maybe a little routine, but never broken, never close to something like this. And I remember just staring at her, waiting for the real explanation to come, waiting for the part where she tells me what's actually wrong, what I did, what changed, but it never came. She just repeated the same thing in different ways: space, clarity, time, like those words were supposed to fill the gap where the truth should have been. And the worst part wasn't even what she said, it was how calm she was while saying it, like she had already made the decision long before that conversation, like I was just catching up to something that had already been set in motion. I didn't fight it, not because I didn't care, but because something about the way she said it made me realize that fighting wouldn't change anything. When someone asks for a break like that, they're not asking, they're informing you, and pushing back only makes you look desperate. So I nodded, asked a few questions that didn't really go anywhere, and within a week, she had packed a bag and moved out. Not completely, just temporarily, she said, staying with a friend, needing distance, promising we'd talk soon, and I let her go because I thought that was the right thing to do. I thought giving her space would somehow bring her back. The first few days were quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels wrong, like something is missing that you can't replace with distractions. And I tried, I went to work, I met up with friends, I kept myself busy, but every time I came back home, the apartment felt different, like it had lost something I couldn't name. And at night, that's when it got worse, because that's when you start thinking, replaying every conversation, every moment, trying to figure out when things started going wrong, trying to find the point where you could have done something differently. She texted occasionally, short messages, nothing emotional, just enough to keep the connection alive without actually saying anything meaningful, and I responded the same way, careful, controlled, not wanting to push too hard, not wanting to scare her away completely. And for a while, I convinced myself that this was just a phase, that we'd work through it, that this break would somehow make us stronger. Then, about 2 weeks in, something small happened that changed everything. I got a notification from our joint streaming account, nothing important at first glance, just a new device logged in, something you'd normally ignore. But what caught my attention wasn't the notification itself, it was the location. It wasn't her friend's place, at least not the one she told me she was staying at. It was across town, a completely different area, and I remember staring at it for a second longer than necessary, my brain trying to rationalize it. Maybe she visited someone, maybe it was a glitch, maybe I was overthinking again, but something didn't sit right. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I checked the account later that night, just casually, just curiosity, and I saw that the profile she always used was active, currently watching something, and I hovered over it, not even sure what I was looking for until I noticed the viewing history. It wasn't just random shows, it was consistent, same time every night, same location, same pattern, like she had settled into a routine somewhere that wasn't where she said she was. That's when the thought hit me. Not fully formed. Just enough. She wasn't alone. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling that familiar shift inside me, the one that starts quietly before it turns into something you can't ignore, and for a moment, I almost closed the laptop, almost chose not to dig deeper, because sometimes not knowing is easier. Sometimes you can still pretend things are fixable if you don't look too closely, but I didn't close it. I opened the device history instead. And there it was. A second profile. Not new. Not random. Used regularly. Same times. Same location. Different name. I didn't recognize it, which made it worse. Because if it was someone I knew, at least I'd have a direction, a face, a story, but this was just a blank space filled with possibilities, none of them good. I sat there for a long time, longer than I should have, just looking at it, letting the realization settle in slowly, not rushing it, not reacting immediately, because I had learned something before. Reacting too fast only gives the other person time to adjust, to lie better, to cover their tracks. So I did nothing. For 2 more days. I kept texting her like everything was normal. I kept going to work. I kept playing my part. But inside, something had already changed, something colder, something more focused, because now this wasn't about fixing the relationship anymore, this was about understanding what actually happened. On the third night, I drove to that location. Not impulsively. Not angrily. Just calmly. Like I was going somewhere I already knew I needed to be. It was an apartment complex, nothing special, just another building in a part of the city I didn't visit often, and I parked across the street, not too close, not too far, just enough to see the entrance without being obvious, and for a moment, I just sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing steady, waiting for something I didn't even know what exactly. Then I saw her. Walking out. Laughing. And she wasn't alone. The guy next to her? I recognized him immediately. Not from her stories. Not from her friends. But from somewhere else. Not her work. And that's when everything stopped feeling like a coincidence. Because I knew exactly who he was. And more importantly, he knew exactly who I was too. I didn't step out of the car right away when I saw them, I just sat there gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than before, watching the two of them walk toward the sidewalk like it was the most normal thing in the world, like there was nothing wrong with what they were doing, and the more I looked at him, the clearer it became, because this wasn't just some random guy she met while we were on a break, this was someone from my own environment, someone who had been close enough to know me, to understand my life, my schedule, my relationship, and that changed everything because cheating is one thing, but this meant it wasn't accidental, it wasn't emotional, it was calculated. His name is Evan, and I didn't just recognize him, I knew him, not well enough to call him a friend, but well enough that we had talked before, shared the same space more than once, exchanged casual conversations at work events, laughed at the same stupid jokes in a group setting, and suddenly all those moments replayed in my head in a completely different way, like every interaction had a second layer I never noticed at the time, like every time he smiled, every time he asked about my life, he wasn't just being friendly, he was gathering information. They stopped near the corner, still talking, still laughing, and for a moment, I watched their body language carefully, not emotionally, just objectively, like I was analyzing something instead of reacting to it, and what I saw told me more than I expected. This wasn't new, there was no awkwardness, no hesitation, no uncertainty, they were comfortable, too comfortable, like this had been going on for longer than just the 2 weeks we were on a break. That's when the timeline in my head started shifting. The break wasn't the start. It was the cover. I exhaled slowly, leaned back in my seat, and for a second, I almost felt impressed, not in a good way, but in that cold, detached way where you recognize the level of planning behind something, because if I was right, this didn't just happen, it was built, step by step, quietly, carefully, while I was still fully invested in the relationship. I didn't confront them, not there, not like that, because walking up and calling them out would only give them the advantage, it would turn this into a messy emotional situation where they could lie, deny, twist the story, make it look like I was overreacting, and I wasn't going to give them that, not after what I was starting to realize. So I stayed, I watched, until they got into his car and drove off together, and I followed, not aggressively, not close enough to be noticed, just enough to keep them in sight, and as I drove behind them, something inside me felt different than before, not broken, not angry, just focused, like everything was starting to make sense in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. They didn't go far, just a few blocks, another apartment building, different from the first one, and that's when it hit me again, this wasn't random, this wasn't spontaneous, this was structured, 2 locations, 2 patterns, 2 layers, and I parked further away this time, not even trying to get too close, because I didn't need to see more, I already had enough, and instead of staying, I turned the car around and drove home, not fast, not recklessly, just steady, like I had already made a decision. Because now I understood something I hadn't before, this wasn't just her betraying me, this was both of them playing me, and people don't put that much effort into something unless there's a reason, something to gain. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was upset, but because I was thinking, replaying everything, not emotionally, logically, looking for patterns, connections, anything that explained why him, why now, why like this, and it didn't take long before something obvious finally surfaced. Specifically, my position, my access, my accounts. I sat up slowly in bed, staring into the dark as the realization fully formed, because Evan wasn't just some random coworker, he worked close enough to understand how things moved, and more importantly, close enough to know what I had access to: sensitive approvals, internal systems, things that, if used correctly, could be very valuable. I got up, walked straight to my laptop, and logged in, checked recent activity, and at first glance everything looked normal, no major changes, no obvious red flags, but I wasn't looking for obvious anymore, I was looking for subtle, and that's where I found it: small approvals, minor adjustments, nothing big enough to trigger alerts, but consistent, too consistent, timed, and then I saw it. Login attempts. From a device that wasn't mine. Not successful. But repeated. Careful. Testing. Learning. I leaned back slowly, exhaling as everything finally locked into place, because now it was clear, this wasn't just cheating, this wasn't just emotions, this was a setup, and I had been standing in the middle of it the entire time. Using me. Getting close. Learning patterns. And when the time was right, removing me. The break. The distance. The distraction. It all made sense now. I closed the laptop slowly, very slowly, because now the situation had changed completely. This wasn't personal anymore, this was strategic, and if they thought they were the only ones playing this game, they were about to find out how wrong they were. I didn't confront her the next day or the day after that, and I definitely didn't mention anything about Evan, because the moment you show your cards too early, you lose control of the game, and right now control was the only thing I had. So instead I did the opposite of what they expected. I acted normal, maybe even better than normal. I texted her first, kept the tone light, supportive, like I was still the same guy waiting patiently for his wife to figure things out, and she responded. Exactly how I thought she would: short, careful, just enough to keep me in place without giving anything away, and that told me everything I needed to know. She thought I was still blind. Because blind people don't get watched. That gave me time. The first thing I did was clean up everything on my side, quietly, systematically. I reviewed every account I had access to, every approval chain, every system that required my authorization, and I didn't shut anything down completely, not yet, because that would raise flags. Instead I adjusted things subtly. I changed authentication layers, updated device recognition settings, added silent alerts that would only notify me if certain actions were attempted again, things that wouldn't interfere with daily operations but would give me visibility, real visibility, into what was actually happening. Then I went deeper. I looked at those small approvals again, the ones that didn't make sense at first, and I followed them, one by one, tracing where they led, what they connected to, and that's when I saw the pattern clearly. They weren't random at all, they were testing limits, small transactions, low-risk adjustments, things designed to see how far they could go without being noticed, and the way they were spaced out told me something else too. This wasn't just Evan acting alone, he didn't have that kind of patience, that kind of access. This required timing, coordination. Inside access. From someone who knew exactly when I wasn't looking. From someone who knew my routine. From someone who knew when I was distracted. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, not even surprised anymore, because at this point it all fit too well. The break, the distance, the emotional disconnect. It wasn't just about creating space, it was about removing oversight, making sure I wasn't paying attention while they tested the boundaries of what they could get away with. But here's the thing. They thought they were still in the testing phase. They thought they were being careful. They thought I hadn't noticed. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I stopped checking certain things. On purpose. I left small gaps. Intentional ones. Places where it looked like I had gotten lazy, like I trusted the system too much, like I wasn't watching as closely anymore, and I knew they'd see it, because people like them always do. They look for patterns, for weaknesses, for moments where they can push just a little further. And they did. It took 2 days. That's all. On the third night I got the alert. Not loud. Not obvious. Just a quiet notification on my phone. Access granted. Different device. Higher level request. Not huge, but bigger than before. A step up. Exactly what I was waiting for. I didn't react immediately. I let it go through. That was important. Because stopping it too early would only scare them off, make them pull back, and I needed them comfortable. I needed them to believe they were finally getting somewhere, that all their planning was working. So I waited. And they kept going. Small at first. Then slightly bigger. Each move more confident than the last. Until they crossed the line. The real one. The kind of transaction that doesn't just raise flags internally, it triggers external oversight, compliance checks, legal thresholds, the kind of move that, once it's logged, can't just disappear. That's when I acted. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just precisely. I locked everything down in under 30 seconds. Full system freeze. Access revoked. Sessions terminated. And more importantly, logs secured. Every action. Every attempt. Every connection between devices. Between accounts. Between them. Because by that point, it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Undeniable. I sat there in silence for a moment after it was done, looking at the screen, feeling that same calm settle in again, because this was the part they never planned for, the part where the person they thought they were using stops playing along. My phone rang 5 minutes later. Her name. Of course. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Hey, I said, my voice completely normal. What did you do? She asked immediately, no greeting, no pretending, just straight to it, her voice tight, controlled but barely. I leaned back in my chair. Not sure what you mean, I replied. Don't do that, she snapped, the first real crack in her tone I had heard in weeks. Everything just got locked, Evan can't. She stopped. Too late. I smiled slightly. Evan can't what? I asked. Silence. Heavy. Then breathing. Uneven. You've been watching, she said quietly. There was. Not a question. A realization. Yes, I said. No hesitation. No denial. Because at this point, there was no reason to hide it anymore. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she spoke again. You don't understand, she said, her voice shifting now, softer, almost trying to pull me back into something emotional, something familiar. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I almost laughed. Because that was the truth, just not in the way she meant it. I think I understand perfectly, I replied, my tone still calm, still controlled. The break, the timing, the access attempts, the coordination, it's actually pretty impressive. She didn't respond. And that silence told me more than anything else could. Because she knew. She knew it was over. Not just us. Everything. You need to fix this, she said finally, but there was no authority in it anymore, no control, just urgency. You don't realize how bad this can get. I stood up slowly, walking toward the window, looking out at the city like none of this was even affecting me anymore. Oh, I realize, I said quietly. Then I paused. Just for a second. Because this next part was the part they really didn't see coming. I just don't think you realize who it's going to be bad for. And then I hung up. I didn't call her back after that, because there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to argue about, and more importantly, nothing left that required emotion, because at that point everything had already moved past that stage and into something colder, something that didn't care how either of us felt, only what had been done and what would happen next. So the next morning I went to work like it was any other day, same time, same routine, same expression, because people only notice change when you show it, and I wasn't going to give anyone that advantage, not yet, but the moment I stepped into the building I could feel it immediately, that subtle shift in atmosphere, conversations stopping just a little too fast, people glancing in my direction a second longer than usual, like something had already started moving before I even got there, and then I saw him, Evan, standing near the hallway talking to someone from compliance, his posture stiff, his voice controlled but tight, like he was trying to hold something together that was already falling apart, and the second he looked at me I saw it clearly, not guilt, not embarrassment, but panic, real panic, the kind that only shows up when someone realizes the situation is bigger than they planned for. But I didn't stop, I didn't slow down, I just walked past him like he didn't exist, because in that moment he didn't anymore, not in any way that mattered, and by midday the emails started going out, internal review, access. Violations, unusual activity flagged, all the quiet things they thought would stay hidden were now documented, traceable, permanent, and I stayed exactly where I needed to be, answering only what was asked, Nothing more, nothing less. Because when the truth is clean you don't need to defend it. And around 3 in the afternoon I was called into a meeting, small room, compliance, legal, my manager, questions were direct, timeline, access points, patterns, and I gave them everything they needed. Without hesitation, not as a husband, not as someone betrayed, but as someone who understood exactly what had happened, and when I walked out Evan was gone, not stepped out, not on break, just gone, access revoked, badge deactivated, erased from the system in a way that leaves no room for coming back. And that night she called again, I didn't answer, she texted instead, long messages, explanations, trying to reshape the story into something softer, something that sounded less intentional, saying it wasn't supposed to go this far, saying Evan pushed things further than planned, and that line was the only one that mattered, not because I believed her, but because of what it revealed, because it meant this didn't start with him. So I replied with one question, just one, whose idea was it first, and this time she didn't take long to answer, just one word, mine, no explanation, no excuse, just that, and somehow that was colder than everything else combined, because it confirmed what I had already figured out. The break wasn't a reaction, it was a move, the distance wasn't emotional, it was strategic, she didn't get pulled into anything, she built it, and Evan was just the one who got greedy at the end. And after that I didn't respond again, because there was nothing left worth responding to. The next few days passed quietly on the surface, but internally everything moved fast. Investigations, reports, consequences, and I stayed untouched, clean, exactly where I needed to be. Because I never crossed the line, they did, and about a week later I saw her one last time, not planned, just one of those moments where paths cross without warning, and she looked different, not broken, just stripped of the confidence she used to carry, like everything she thought she controlled had been taken away from her. We stood there for a second without speaking, because we both already knew how this ended. And then she asked the only question that mattered to her, did you ever actually believe me? And I looked at her just long enough to answer honestly, I did, and that's why it worked for as long as it did. And she didn't reply after that because there was nothing left to say, and I walked away without looking back, because the truth was never about them getting caught. It was about them thinking I would never look, and that was the only mistake that mattered.